Before I begin, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
I'll take my POIs verbally, I'll time myself, and I'll begin momentarily. In this speech, several points of framing and then two constructive arguments. First, a few points of framing in this speech. Number one, I think this is going to be done across religions. That is both an intra-faith dialogue, whereby you have for example, like Sunni and Shia leaders talking to each other, and across different religions, insofar as you have like the Pope and like a Grand Mufti of like Sunni Islam, and like you have like Jewish rabbis and Buddhist monks all talking to one another. I think it's realistic to say this is likely to be the push, insofar as there's an active incentive to do this and to do this well, because each religious leader wants to do this to protect people of their respective faith. I think when the motion says religions, it actively implies religious leaders. That is like the people from the top down, insofar as they have the greatest power, the greatest capacity, the greatest pull. Next, I think this motion applies to both developing states and developed ones. In developed ones, these narratives of religious pluralism likely have a low burden for buy-in, given how multicultural they are. In developing ones, however, we believe that religious leaders have a great amount of political influence and a great degree of importance to society as a whole, which I will prove in substantive as to why this gives them the unique capacity to better the lives of everyone. 2 points in this speech. Number one, why we get greater respect for other religions and other interfaith groups. Number two, why we get a substantially greater rise in support for pluralism by the state. Argument one, why we get greater respect for other religions and interfaith groups and why this is important. I think it's very important to note that in most states, you have multiple different religions that have to coexist with each other. For example, in Lebanon, you have to have Christians and Muslims coexist. The same thing is true in Israel and Palestine, or in the United States, or in the UK, for the simple reason that people don't group into states based on their religion, but their religion is something very, very personal to them, and religious communities often exist regardless of what state you're in. What this means is that it's very important that we try to make sure that the state does not have a monopoly on like harassing particular people because of their religion, and that individual people who form a majority of a certain religious community don't use their political and economic and other power to oppress other people. Well, the way in which we think we solve this is that the vast majority of religious people believe what their leaders say and internalize it to some extent, insofar as they believe that God commanded these people to teach them the truth. This is especially true in nations with like a very, very like strong belief in religion. For example, in Poland with the Catholic Church, or in Pakistan with more fundamentalist Islamic narratives. The reason for this being that they've been indoctrinated from birth by their parents and by the society to believe that these are the highest authorities in the world, that these are people who are speaking the word of God, that everything they say ought to be, for example, followed. I think, therefore, we solve the problem of religious violence, both psychological and physical violence, in 4 key ways. Mechanism number one. Insofar as your leaders push a narrative that says that it is all right to be a member of a religion, you are normalized to respect and understand people who believe in a different religion than you. For example, if the Pope says you shouldn't God loves all human beings, and therefore the Muslims should be allowed to practice their religion same as you do, I think there's a likelihood that if you're in Lebanon and if you're a Catholic or Alawite Christian and your Alawite leader is saying so, I think there's a likelihood that you're probably going to have a significant no thank you, I'll take you later. I think it's probably likely you're going to internalize this narrative to a significant extent. But no, I think this is also likely to be done on a local level, insofar as you have local religious leaders advocating for this, for the incentive analysis I explained to you in framing. Secondly, you are not fighting for your religion to be the only and dominant religion, so it's no longer seen as competition but cooperation within the religions. So within like a prisoner's dilemma and game theoretic system, you are now actively resulting in, like, for example, more cooperation as something that leads to less violence and less like hatred amongst the groups, since you no longer have an active incentive to buy into hateful narratives. Third, you also have better safe spaces of religions. The reason why these safe spaces are important is because they enable people to have a degree and sense of community that understands them. Your connection to God is oftentimes something you very deeply care about, which means that if I'm Jewish in a more Muslim state, or if I'm if I'm Muslim in a more Christian state, then it's very important that I have the right to practice my own religion. Fourth, you also protect minority religions. Insofar as these are the most vulnerable people, on the counterfactual, you presumably have the majority religion, to like suffer harms and discrimination. I think the likely counterfactual that OP has to stand behind is a world in which these religious leaders are not promoting religious pluralism, but are saying our religion is the right religion, our religion is the dominant religion, thus fueling and stoking these narratives. I'll take a POI from closing opposition now.
You haven't actually mechanized pluralism. What you've said is the Pope should be tolerant. You need to say that Islam is equally valid and will also get you to heaven as a Christian within your world. That's the burden on government.
No, not exactly. What religious pluralism means, as I already explained to you in framing, is a greater degree of respect and interfaith communication among religions. That is to say, you as the Pope say, I believe in Christianity because I'm the leader of the Christian faith, but you ought to respect like you ought to respect members of a different religion. I think the reason why this is the likely counterfactual that we defend is because it's the narrative that is most salient and most like empirically the narrative that is pushed in the real world, insofar as the actual fucking Pope Francis has literally said and done this with other religious leaders. But note the counterfactual. In a society where religions are fighting for dominance, this is often reliant on violent rhetoric and norms, i.e. the other religion is bad or you have to convert to our religions, which compromises your safe space insofar as you feel invalid and also threatens you. So if Muzzy is right that this is a narrative that like religious leaders are going to like now push that all religions are equally valid, I'm genuinely unclear as to why this is about. I think the impact of this is very clear. You have more safety, you have less violence, you have things like you have a reduction in things like microaggressions and discrimination within states. I think broadly support for individual like religious groups goes far up on our side of the house. But secondarily, you also get a rise in support from pluralism by the state. Note that in the status quo, a lot of democratic and undemocratic states like Pakistan, which is more of a democracy, and Iran, which is an autocracy, tend to be based on a particular sect of religious fundamentalism that undermines pluralism. That is to say, the religious leaders in these states have a lot to do with not only how policy is implemented, but they have a lot of influence on the government and on legislation. But now when you have religious leaders push for pluralism, it translates into democratic support for pluralism in two ways. Number one, people vote for pluralistic parties insofar as they're in line with the religious doctrine they believe in and internalize and like actually want to see carried out. Secondly, this prevents a very dominant religion from having total control, insofar as like a very strong Catholic institution no longer has an incentive to oppress Jews. When the Pope says you ought not to do this, it's a religious command by God that you ought to respect the Jewish and Muslim people, and therefore you shouldn't do all of this bad shit, which can happen in a democracy insofar as the dominant religion often has a lot of political influence and power. When it's the majority, most democracies feature a rule of the majority, at least most in the world. Even in autocracies, you're likely to have the government, like whose leaders probably believe in these religious leaders to an extent, seek to want to placate them or appease them by offering some benefits to marginalized religious communities. I think the way this largely manifests is that in places like Latin America, where historically you saw like the Catholic Church have a large amount and degree of political influence because of the way in which it was ingrained into Latin American society, a lot of Latin American leaders had to stop prosecuting Muslims or stop prosecuting Christians who were Protestant or stop prosecuting, for example, like Jewish people in these states, specifically because the Pope told them you ought not to do this. It's a sin. It's wrong to prosecute people on the basis of their faith. You ought to push for a more pluralistic society whereby people can practice and respect their faith. I think at a point at which you internalize this, you now offer a unique degree of lower likelihood for the state to oppress religious minorities. You substantially increase their safety. Because these minorities are the most vulnerable actors whenever respective states they're in, and because we prove their lives get better on our side of the house, we're so happy to win this debate from opening government.
I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech. I'd now like to invite the LO.
Okay, just 2 seconds while I get timer set up.
Yep, that's all good.
Okay. I want to note two things at the beginning of my speech, which massively harmed the OG case in this debate. First of all, I don't think they're ever able to meet their actual burden in this debate, right? They say that this is going to look like people like the Pope just be like, you have to respect other like religions. But that's not what this says, right? No, that's pretty much like the status quo, right? Most religious leaders don't preach going out and killing people from other religions. They just preach like general levels of respect to other individuals. What the burden on the government side of the house here is to actually say that their religion is equally as important as other religions and that they're on the same philosophical level as each other, and quite crucially that both of them offer the same level of salvation, right? So regardless of which religion you join, you're going to end up in heaven if you join any religion, right? That is the burden on government side of the house. I think if they're unable to defend that, then they just lose this debate. The second really crucial thing to note here is I don't think government ever actually tell you what the interests of religious people are, because note that like the motion literally states that like this is supposed to happen in the interests of religious people. So I think when they're unable to tell us why it is the case that it's within the interests of religious people for the state to recognize pluralism more, then the point completely falls out of the debate, right? Because they have to link this to why this is actively in the interest of religious people. I think religious people have a couple of interests which are really important. I think they probably want to end up in heaven, right? That is to say that they want to do things which are going to allow them to end up in heaven, because like that's the teaching of religion, or end up in like the afterlife or whatever it might be, like if they're like reincarnated well, right? So I think this probably means that they want to push the correct religion onto people, because often religions teach that if you teach other people your religion, you will end up in heaven. heaven, etc. But I also think it probably means that religious individuals, and I think the other interest of religious individuals is just to have a strong like religion in and of themselves, right? So to have a religion that is widely respected, to have lots of people that buy into your religion, because this is the thing that allows you to access like community benefits and all of this. I think that these are the interests of religious people, and I think that given that pluralism doesn't fulfill these interests, we shouldn't do this policy. Okay, two broad things in my speech. Firstly, just looking at why this is like unlikely to ever kind of be bought into by religious people, and then secondly, looking at why this decreases the number of people that buy into specific religions in the first place. Okay, I want to note here that I think there's absolutely no empirical way to actually verify that God exists for like every single religion across the globe, right? So I think this means a couple of things. A, it means that there are lots of different religions. Lots of different religions have lots of different gods, right? So like the Muslim God is very different to the Hindu God because they fundamentally don't conceive of God in the same way, right? B, I think there are just different mechanisms to which people have decided that God exists in the first place. So even if like Christianity and Islam and Judaism all agree that like there is a God that is like one like eternal being, right? The mechanisms by which they've decided that God exists and the mechanisms by which God has like given things to them on the earth are very, very different, right? Because there's never been an empirical way to verify what is actually the truth here. And third of all, I think there are just like lots of different traditions within religions based off the fact that they have lots of different like ways of verifying God. So some religions fast for a month, while other religions don't find that necessary because they don't think that's what God is teaching them. This means that like religious diversity is absolutely huge, and it is really unlikely that people within a religion actually buy into the idea that other religions that are diametrically opposed to them have any sort of level of same like philosophical value or have any sort of level of like allowing the same level of salvation, right? And I think people are just unlikely to think this is true because it undermines like the core teachings of their religion, right? Because they're taught like through their scriptures that their religion is the correct religion to follow, that their religion is the best religion to follow. That's why they're following it like in the first place for most people, right? And I think what this means is that like because this doctrine says that if you follow this religion you will get into heaven, I think religious people see this as like an existential threat to them because now they have to concede that other religions might be of the same level of significance, same level of prominence to them, and this is directly not in their interest because it actually like means that they're going against the active teachings from the God which they deem to be true in religious like scriptures, right? I think at that point you get very low levels of buy-in from religious people, huge amounts of hostility to this policy, and I think this probably means that this policy is never going to work and religious people will never truly believe this like to be the case in the first place. I think I think a government's worst case scenario is that people actively think this is going against the religious teachings of their doctrine and therefore like just think that like their religion is a bit like a scam and not really true. Second push then, why people are less likely to join specific religions here, because I want to note that people have various different incentives to join religions. I think people have an incentive to join like the correct religion, right? Because they want to like spread the correct religion in order to get like good points and therefore like enter into heaven, because often religions have a narrative where say if you teach other people your religion, this like adds like points onto your score or whatever, and like this means you're more likely to get into heaven. It acts as like a good thing that you do. But B, I think people just like want to like join like religions or want people to join their religions, given that it allows like more political capital to, or more capital in general to amount to their religion. So this probably means that you have like better, bigger communities, which means you're able to access community benefits to a greater degree, right? Because you have more people within like your community. But B, I think it probably just gives you more levels of political capital. Now, this is like really crucial in places that like OG wants to talk about, where there are lots of different religions, right? Having more people in your religion, especially if you're a minority religion in that area, allows you to ensure that you have some bargaining chip against the government because you're a significant part of the populace here, right? So I think religious people want people to join their religion like in the first place, right? I think that when this policy is enacted and like now there's an idea that all religions are on the same philosophical level and have the same like level of meaning, right? It means that like it doesn't actually matter which religion an individual follows, because you like are all going to achieve the same level of salvation, but you're all going to end up in heaven together regardless of which religion you choose to follow in the first place. Like your afterlife will be completely fine, right? God's not going to be angry at you because you follow a different religion, right? And I think what this means is it changes the decision calculus when it comes to actually choosing like which religion to follow like in the first place, because I think what's more likely to happen is individuals opt to follow a religion which is far easier for them to follow in terms of like the laws and rules of that religion rather than a harder religion. So this looks like people choosing Christianity over Islam because Islam has more restrictions on their life in terms of drinking, in terms of the types of food they can eat, right? So I think this means that certain people are just less likely to join certain religions more. So any atheists are unlikely to join a religion that is really quite difficult, because like they're going to be able to join an easier religion and still access all of the same benefits. But B, I think people are just are more able to opt out of religions and opt into easier religions if they see fit. The comparative here is I think people just choose religions based off of like their area, their family, etc. But also people that are opting into religion in the first place probably choose religions off of which religion they actually feel personally attached to, which religion they actually feel is correct, as opposed to just like blindly choosing whichever one is easiest for them to follow. The impacts here are massive, right? I think you have less people that are wanting to like join specific religious groups. And I think that this directly goes against the incentives of religious people, because I think you have less people in your religion, so you like failed insofar as you're unable to spread your religious message to the most amount of people. I think for religious people this is seen as like an absolute failure on their part. But B, I think you have far worse communities, right? You have less people as part of religion. You're less able to make any sort of political change. Communities probably get far, far worse at the point at which you have less people within these communities because people just aren't opting into them. For these reasons,
I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech and like to remind people, as per the World Handbook, to please offer and accept POIs during the debate. They are very important for engagement. But with that, I now like to invite the DPM.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Amazing. If I could have POIs in the chat, that would be really great. And I'll be starting in a sec. The vast majority of societies in the status quo are plural. Religious pluralism is unavoidable and the only metric by which we can achieve greater freedoms and respect and tolerance, crucially for religious people, and therefore fulfill the aims of the motion. Note what changes in this motion is that followers of any religion learn how to live with other religions because they accept that no religion ultimately has evidence and conclusive proof that they are right and another religion is wrong. They learn to accept that they are all correct in their own metrics. Crucially, then, OG serves the interests of religious people through protecting, firstly, religious minorities, but also creating a more fulfilling and safe religious environment and communities in general. Firstly, I want to do some rebuilding in terms of communities because I think this is incredibly important and doesn't go engaged with. I think you create a very safe amount of communities, both in local environments, but also in societies and states in general. Insofar as the vast majority of societies have a vast majority of pluralism due to things such as migration and globalization, which means that we move around more, and therefore religion spread more in terms of how we process societies in general. Insofar as you are now teaching people from the top down, from religious leaders that people respect and see as the word of God, that you have to respect other religions because you do not know that yours is superior. You have no conclusive proof, or everyone is right in their own manner. You create a greater degree of tolerance. You do not now have situations whereby religious individuals forcefully try to convert other people because they have a mindset of religious superiority, because they're able to acknowledge that they have their own religion that is right in their own way. Secondarily, you feel better within your own religion because now other people within this community do not ridicule it or see it as something that is wrong or laughable or something that is worse or lesser than their religion or the dominant religion within the state. This means we protect religious people, especially those in religious minorities, from a vast amount of emotional pain through the fact that something that's incredibly close to them, that being religion, is actively laughed at and actively ridiculed. You also do not put people in the burden whereby they have to defend their religion. Note this creates a lot of harmful discourse for people insofar as you put them in a situation where you have to defend something that is very close to you, your family, your community, your history. You have to tell people that what you practice and how you live your life is valid and have to defend this. This is extremely emotionally taxing insofar as, one, the people you're telling this on the counterfactual aren't going to believe this and are still going to ridicule this, but it's also going to diminish the way you interact with your own religion because you now see it as something that's painful, as something that you actively have to prove so other people do not laugh at you. This is or laugh at you and do not and tolerate you to a great degree and give you the basic rights and respect that you as a religious person deserve. You uniquely only get this on opening government. From opposition, what we hear is the fact that you now aren't able to access heaven because you believe that you ought to spread religion to do this, and this causes essentially an existential religious crisis. Firstly, The vast amount of power religious individuals interact with religion is via religious leaders themselves, insofar as they are seen as the religious authority and the word of God, and the closest thing you have towards actual religion and actual word of God, because they have been divinely chosen and selected and put on this earth specifically to guide you and other religious people in your community. This means that insofar as now this religious person tells you that you do not have to do this in order to access heaven, you're likely going to firstly buy into this because you believe them, but also trust this insofar as they're meant to guide your soul to heaven. This means that you necessarily do not feel the burden that the opposition pushes on you to such a great extent. They're likely going to prioritize other ways of getting into heaven, whether that be charity work or being a good person or fulfilling your other religious obligations. Note religious perspectives change over time, whether that be the Catholic Church finally deeming gay people not being automatically having been doomed to hell and actively being committing vast amounts of sins, or the changing perspectives over time. This likely means that you're able to adhere to this. But secondarily, even if you still engage with it, of what opening opposition tells you in regards to trying to convert people to your religion, you now do this in a really in a far healthier way, insofar as you don't do this by actively talking negatively about other religions. You don't necessarily have to say why other religions don't work or why your soul is doomed, but rather you focus on the positive aspects of your religion. This becomes less coercive insofar as you're not trying to gaslight people into believing that other religions are stupid or you're going to hell if you don't do this, but rather you focus on the positive things that the religion can bring to your life. And that's the point at which you're actually able to fulfill this. Secondarily, what we tell you about undermining core teachings. Once again, I think it's very important to note and the importance you place on your religion. I think insofar as why you won't feel this as undermined. Firstly, the religious figure material I already talked to you about. But secondarily, it is your faith. For example, you might acknowledge now that there's a multitude of faiths in society, but you still have an intrinsic value and connection to your faith that you're going to weigh highly in this narrative, insofar as it's proximate to you, it's something that you've grown up with. You may acknowledge that there's no religion that has certainty of religious truth. However, you still buy into, for example, Christianity or Islam because this is what you value and this is what has a connection to your soul, what you've been taught into. This means it still has an incredibly high value to you because it's what your family believes. It's what you believe as an individual. You have a sense of community in this situation, and this is incredibly meaningful to you, which means you're still going to have a high level of connectedness. Thirdly, in terms of religious capital, we hear material that you have a less capacity to form communities, and therefore you aren't as able to galvanize certain causes, but also less political capital. Firstly, in terms of religious communities, I posit that it's far more better to have smaller communities, or have these communities be safer, than have this widespread of religious communities where you're actively trying to force other individuals into your religion, which is actively harmful or more passive members. Note crucially, communities don't become far safer on outside the house, as I've already characterized, due to the fact that you become more accepting and more tolerant within this society because you do not have active discrimination or disregard towards other religions. This is incredibly important. Secondarily, you do not need vast amounts of political capital to defend your religion and outside the house, insofar as you are respected irregardless. For example, you don't need to galvanize mass support to prove that your religion ought not to be discriminated against, insofar as it's something that stands within society and is upheld by all religious leaders, which means that this discrimination crucially doesn't happen. In terms of weighing, we demonstrate to you why the most vulnerable individuals, especially those in minority religions who otherwise are oftentimes facing discrimination, hate crimes, and other vast intangible harms, are in a far better scenario insofar as religious individuals, but also religious institutions in general, now propagate an idea of respecting and tolerating other individuals. This is incredibly important insofar as we protect the religious interests of people far more through creating, one, a more flexible environment, whether you can choose to opt in or opt out of a religion that suits your interests, which is incredibly important and less coercive. But also, religious individuals have safer and more fulfilling interactions with religions, and society in general becomes far more accepting, incredibly proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and remind speakers again to please offer and accept POIs during the debate. They're very important for engagement. But with that, I now like to invite the DLO.
Cool. Can I be heard clearly?
Yep.
Yeah. Beginning in 3, 2, 1, go. The first thing I'll address is the actual quantity that they're able to reach in terms of their impact, in terms of like how like religious tolerance doesn't exist. I think firstly, they need to prove specifically that like religious tolerance doesn't exist in the status quo to a large level. Here are some reasons why it does. I think firstly, because there's an incentive for self-preservation. That is to say that at the point at which you enter into a direct conflict with another person, you directly risk individuals of your own community dying and just being like really harmed. I think two, if they are in multicultural societies, they're just a necessary incentive to collaborate with them in terms of stuff like politics, etc. But I think three, as Zainab tells you, a lot of religions have explicit teachings on benevolence and how you ought to respect other people. I think at that point specifically, a lot of the it's a very debater claim to say that religious tensions do exist, but no, crucially, the amount of religious tensions doesn't exist to the same scale that opening government wants to talk about. What this looks like is maybe a Sunni leader saying the Shia teachings might be wrong, but that in and of itself doesn't lead to a high level of conflict that exists in the status quo. I think the second thing is that there are other mechanisms by which tensions accrue. I think firstly, this looks like ethnicity, for example, India and Pakistan. Two, this looks like historical, like just offset of like norms and the fact that colonialism put in place in-groups and out-groups, which directly pitted different groups and ethnicities against each other. I think three, they're just geographic incentives that exist in terms of stuff like grabbing land or like wanting to like have a new home, etc., which means that all of these incentives exist external to religion. But crucially, I want to weigh these three things over religion and why these are more important in terms of getting these tensions in the first place. I think firstly, because these are more proximal to the average individual, and that like a lot of the like mechanisms by which they derive like their daily lives exist in terms of stuff like geography or like the ethnicity that they have. I think two, these are more deep set in terms of the actual things that individuals care about. I think three, these are promoted by actors like the state as like forms of propagandization. But I think fourthly, this is just the prerequisite for religion. That is to say that all members of a religion don't fight, but they like the members of that religion in that specific like geographic area fight. So I think at that point, this becomes a prerequisite for religion and is more important than religion in terms of these conflicts. The second push we get from DPM is that we'd rather have smaller communities. I want to weigh this off in a few ways. I think firstly, this is not in religious people's interest at the point at which they directly have an incentive to garner more people into like that religious community. The way that Zainab mechanizes this is by telling you that when you are like when you invite more people into the religion, a lot of religions say that is the mechanism by which you go to heaven because you introduce these individuals to God. But I think two, this contingent on them proving that it isn't safe, we mitigate this to a large extent. But I think three, if none of what I said so far is true, people endure religious hatred in the status quo as per their own analysis. I think at that point specifically, safety isn't something that they care about as much as preserving the own teachings of that specific religion and like the fact that their religion is most proximate to them, even when they're able to like just exist within that religion and practice it despite all of these external forces hating on you in opening government's best case. But I want to weigh this claim on like religion and the individual of like in this debate. I think the big premise here is that religion of an individual is the most proximate consideration to that individual. There are three reasons for this. I think firstly, they were raised in the religion and have been taught it their entire life. I think two, there are structures around that specific religion, and at the point at which this motion explicitly denotes religious people, they've bought into these structures, even if they're conditioned or coerced into this, preempting any CG extension. But I think three, this is manifested in a set of practices and traditions that have been largely bought into. The nuance here is twofold. I think firstly, when there's no empirical way to verify God, there are different ways by which they realize this question. But I think the second thing is that the creation of norms and practices has been a century-long process at the point at which you buy into that, and this long process that existed over time means that there's a high level of buy-in from these religious people. But crucially, what this proves is that the specific religion of that individual is the most important consideration to that individual. I think this also quantifies and scales all of Zainab's claims in terms of how individuals want to buy into that religion because it's the most proximal thing to them. I think the second thing here is that advocacy on their side does not mean it will be done well. They merely assert that religious leaders are going to do this well. I was expecting some reasons as to why this is going to happen. I think firstly, because there's why it won't be done well. I think firstly because there's an incredibly high barrier for entry. That is to say that you have to overturn centuries of faith and ways of practices and merely say that the philosophical consideration and the way by which other religions and other people within society reach heaven is the same way that you do. I think what this means then is firstly, individuals just feel an inherent level of self-conflict by the mechanisms that they preserve, like practice religion. Because if the people at the top are like promoting the fact that this is something that ought to be done, people within that religion, when this is such a radical switch because of all of the analysis that I've told you, feel a sense of alienation at the point at which there's something that is so diametrically opposed to everything that they've been taught so far. But I think too, and very importantly, the mechanisms that I told you earlier in terms of like why there's no empirical way to like verify God and the creation of norms means that there are fundamental differences within specific religions and the way by which they realize these different questions. I think at that point specifically, promoting the thing that these philosophical ideas are similar or have a similar level of weight compared to your idea when you've been taught your entire life that these ideas are the only legitimate thing in society promotes a sense of alienation within that specific religion and the individuals within that religion. I think this leads to multiple impacts. Before I move on, does closing have anything?
Yes, for your entire life, you have been practiced, you have been salvaged by this religion, you have loved people who love it and who preach it. And now, because they say other guys are also okay, you suddenly hate all of that. Isn't that kind of ridiculous?
No. So the claim here is that the inherent fundamentals of these religions have been taught to you for centuries, when these are so like when you say that other like fundamental teachings are existing and the way that you reach God is not the unique mechanism by which you reach God. I think firstly you're just able to opt out, as Zainab tells you, but at the point in which these are religious people, the ability to choose doesn't become like that significant because they're still within a specific religion. But I think two, this just makes individuals buy into religion significantly worse at the point at which they've been taught that this is the only mechanism by which you do so. I think the way by which you just say this in a simpler way is just, it's a mindfuck for these individuals. I think I want to quantify this hostility then. I think firstly, individuals within the religion feel like a deep sense of like hatred towards the people at the top, or like feel some, because the only mechanism in OG is that religious leaders will like promote it, therefore everyone in the religion will buy it. But I think the crucial distinction here is that these religious leaders are promoting another set of things to them, their parents, their grandparents, etc. So you have a deep set like entrenchment of norms, which then just when you fundamentally like leave this to like a wholly different like set of norms, is something that is bad. This is bad in terms of preference fulfillment of individuals. This is bad in terms of severity of things. People are taken less seriously. Religions are taken less seriously. We've clearly won this debate from opening opposition. I beg you to pose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech. I'd now like to invite the MG.
Yeah, just a quick second to arrange my papers, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Am I okay to start? Yeah.
When you're ready.
Thank you very much. Okay. 3, 2. Ethnical and severe religious conflicts are incredibly hard to overcome because there is a lot of political capital, economic gain to achieve, and a lot of extreme religious groups that are actively fueling these conflicts. This is what Israel and Palestine looks like, some places in Iraq, some places like there in the Middle East, where it's incredibly hard for us to posit and believe that this type of narrative is going to be proposed by these religions. We're going to talk about rather more specific like occasions that affect a majority of people around the globe that have this sort of unexplained animosity towards others, and they feel not content with their like freedom to practice these beliefs, to practice these, to showcase their beliefs and stuff like that. when we prove that people are likely to buy into this narrative, we are already co-opting a lot of OG's benefits, because this is the premise of their case. They never explain to you why, when your religious priests and authorities talk about this, you actually get the buy-in. They say religious is interchangeable, it changes, gays has been accepted and stuff like that. But we believe this is not sufficient enough. We believe that people aren't as extreme in their religious beliefs as they were before. This looks like you being able to practice sex without getting married. This looks like you drinking alcohol. This looks like you're not fasting, even though you see yourself as a religious person, even though you attend mass and stuff like that. But also notice a lot of cultural exchange took place, and a lot of places have a lot of this exchange going on. This means you have already like eaten stuff that Muslims eat, eaten stuff that Christians eat on their like family dinners and stuff like that. This is how it looks like you already have this belief that you kind of know what's going on with these religions. A lot of media has also contributed to this stuff and also. But notice, for the majority of individuals, the interest is in them being free or feeling free and comfortable to practice this belief without feeling these adverse like things going on. This looks like you or being content with your religion, but not being content with you getting from your office job to pray 5 times a day. We believe this is likely to change when you feel more freedom in being able to practice these beliefs and not feeling the animosity and judgmental looks that are coming to you. We believe people have an a priori belief that people don't accept them because their religious authority tells them that they are not accepted because they are so like extreme in their beliefs that this is the only right thing to do. Notice, secondly, they have experienced already being judged by others, being denied service in some areas and stuff like that, in schools, in their workplace, in their day-to-day lives. We believe this is likely to change when they first remove this a priori belief that it's us versus them, but also when other people inside of these communities believe that these are equally as important. Notice how this narrative looks like when they're proposed by these religious authorities. It's talking about specific practices and symbols that other religions hold. Now, this means you talking about, as a Christian leader, as a Christian authority, talking about Islam practices, such as praying 5 times a day, not eating pork, kind of matching these practices to what you practice to achieve the same goal in the end. This looks like you comparing this stuff to what is your practice. For example, when you, as an Orthodox Christian, have a family gathering, a family slava, like a traditional celebration of your saint, this is equated to their sort of practice and stuff like that. But moreover, it looks like you talking about the broader philosophical ideas of these religions and matching them to your religious philosophical ideas. Now this is the key delta here, because a lot of religions share a common thread. They share a common belief that some doings are going to get you to salvation. Now you get a better understanding. Notice, before this, you already knew that you should respect these people, but you knew that on a superficial level, and you also didn't know why they don't respect you. Now you get a better sense, and you start accepting them much more. You start knowing they're not weird, they're just doing the same thing that I'm doing to get salvation. This is just as legitimate. Notice, why is this likely to be accepted? This is something that OJ is lacking. Firstly, they already have, as I said, like majority of practices are similar. You share a common goal, the salvation, stuff like that, and you feel as though you're both in the right via different mechanism. This is the key. Like you accept them being right and you being right at the same time. Now, why do you accept it? Because there is high religious authority, because your priests and your religious institutions have a monopoly over your eternal life. But also, you no longer feel as though as if these people are actively doing something bad, but rather they're doing something good for themselves, which is equally as legitimate as what I am doing. Because you've been told this in mass, you've been told this by your communities and stuff like that. Up until now, it was seen as blasphemy to do something that is different to what you're doing and stuff like that. This reduces the animosity you have towards other groups and other people. And you feel more guilty if you attack them on their beliefs. This is the key delta here. This is what brings the change in your day-to-day life to stop you from judging other people that are wearing a burqa or a hijab if you don't see it as important and stuff like that. Now also, your behavior on a micro level changes to a certain extent. This looks like, Okay, so the key now is how much this behavior changes, because we proved to you that it's not likely to be changed in a broad sense, like resolving conflicts. But what is likely to change is how political capital interacts with these newfound beliefs that people share now. This looks like politicians not being able to scapegoat other minority religions in order to get political points because you don't support it as much. But it also looks like opening the door for politicians to actually do something good for the religious minorities inside of these communities. This is incredibly important in post-conflict and post-ethnic conflict. No, thank you. Religious conflict, like states and countries. This is like Bosnia, Serbia, where people can't practice their beliefs in their neighborhood because they're of a minority religion. If this is the case, if people buy into this, there is more political capital to actually push for these changes, to get institutions open and stuff like that. But also, it leads to more understanding and more relationship between these communities, because they also share the common societal goals. They want to have the national kitchen, free kitchen for homeless. They want to have free counseling for people that need this. They want to have like political capital, which is more likely to be achieved when you have a common goal, when you have a common front and more understanding between each other. Now also notice, without this religious pluralism, you're going to be stuck believing in your life that there is an animosity towards you, and you're going to kind of self-censor. It's going to be a chilling effect of you kind of saying, oh, I have to go on a break, and then like silently pray, even though this is your practice of your religious belief. We believe this is not a huge impact debate. This is rather what people on their day-to-day lives are more likely to do, how content are they likely to be, and how connected they're likely to be with other people inside of their communities. We believe we'll clearly win this debate.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech. Two quick things. One, yet again, I'd like to remind people, as per the World's Handbook, to accept and offer POIs as they're important for engagement. Also, when speaking, try not to have communications with your partner during the speech. Thank you. And with that, I now like to invite the MO.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Cool. 3, 2, 1. The purpose of religion is not to reduce violence, but rather to ensure. Sorry, my timer didn't start. Can I start if that's fine? My timer didn't start.
Yep, I've reset the time on my end.
Thank you. 3, 2, 1. The purpose of religion is not, in fact, to ensure that minorities get rights or other things, because society progresses on either side of the house. The goal of religion in most instances is to provide things like spiritual fulfillment and ensure that you find meaning in an otherwise meaningless life. Closing opposition is going to prove why this makes this significantly worse for your spiritual fulfillment, and why this makes it much more harmful for you to opt into these types of beliefs on a day-to-day basis. I want to be clear. Opening opposition starts by mentioning, guys, people might buy out and maybe they feel slightly worse. But they don't step through why, even in the instance where you still can believe in religion, why this is significantly worse for you and why this makes your fulfillment much lesser. I have just one piece of rebuttal to the entirety of government bench. I would posit most of their harms at the point where they exist are broadly symmetric. Obviously, there are incentives for secular societies to want to work together. And that's because in most cases you're living together. And that's because in most cases there are other incentives, like the state having literal laws to prevent minorities from being harmed on the comparative. Given this, I'm going to start by establishing the importance of religion. So what is the importance of religion? I think the importance of religion in most instances is that it gives you reassurance and guidance for people. It's often what you base your values on and where you live around. It's a sense of stability in things like a rocky world where it often provides you the basis of your moral compass on the comparative. What then is the problem with side government, and why does it mean that you take away from this? There are three things that I want to note on what happens when you try to say other religions are inherently equivalent. The first is just to note that in many instances, on the comparative, this changes the very nature of religion. Note that this is no longer an absolute truth. This is something that is just an other religion existing out there, which often means that you feel much worse in the kind of belief that you have. You often think, why do I follow this over other types of religion? And you often are quite disillusioned with the way that it functions. Secondly, though, and this is super important, in most cases, you are likely to be significantly more uncertain about your religion. And this is really important because when I read scripture, when I look at things, the reason I tend to have spiritual fulfillment is because I can be consistently assured by the church, by my community, that I am on the right path, that I am following a religion that's going to lead to salvation, and that I am likely to end up in heaven. Note that this is the crucial benefit of religion, because this gives you the ability to opt in and think like, aha, I have spiritual fulfillment, I'm going to go to heaven, and that I am genuinely a good person, and that I'm going to get catharsis because this allows me to uniquely connect to God. The problem in proposition is that when many other religions claim the exact same thing, two things happen. Firstly, we would note that this often causes internal questioning to a very large extent. This kind of uncertainty is uniquely harmful because you often think, wow, every other religion is correct. There's 40 of them out there. Is any religion real? Is there existence of the divine? These are all much likelier questions that people ask themselves on the comparative, and therefore likely have significantly more crises of faith on their side of the house. Secondly, and this is super important, we think in most instances you ensure strength and closeness of community on our side of the house. That's because within our world, when you think that your religion is the correct religion, you're often likely to give up significantly more for it. So this often means showing up to the mosque to pray 5 times a day. You often discuss things like religious crisis of belief on our side of the house, and you often believe in the priest as an authority. This is important because this provides you the ability to believe and be certain in your faith, because you think, aha, I am in the right, I am thinking of things that are important to me. Thirdly, we just do think that you're likely to feel more anxiety on proposition. That's to say that when you think other religions might be correct, you often feel significant amounts of doubt about your own religion. You often question your religious practices to a much larger extent, and you often feel much worse. Notice that this questioning is really harmful because you often cannot discuss this within your community. You often cannot talk about these types of things on the comparative, and therefore you feel worse. What is the comparative within our world? When you think religion is the capital T truth, when you think it is an absolute, a few things happen. One, we think in most cases you are likely to feel significantly more spiritually fulfilled. This looks like feeling like a closer connection with God. You often feel like I am following the right path, and you often feel quite righteous on our side of the house. Secondly, you're much likely to think, hey, I am following a correct thing, and therefore I'm likely to go to heaven. I feel significantly more embroiled with the world. Thirdly, this gives you a sense of meaning in what is an otherwise meaningless world. Note on our side of the house, you get significantly more catharsis because you consistently think you're following the right religion, because you consistently think you're engaging in actions and beliefs that necessarily benefit you on our side of the house. You are likelier on the comparative to think this is important. Finally, though, we would just note that on their side of the house, you often get massive amounts of uncertainty amongst people. Note that this is a massive change in the messaging that you've already done for hundreds of years. This means people are often confused. People often feel like they've been betrayed by their familiar structures and often feel much worse on side proposition. I'll take opening government before I mechanize why you don't believe in religious figures.
There's already a number of countervailing narratives in society that cause you to doubt your religion, such as secularism, such as science, such as enlightenment, all these things which make your case incredibly symmetric.
Religious people don't tend to believe in all of these. But when your religious priest says, hey, maybe this every other religion is valid, your own analysis tells me that this means that people are likely to doubt their religion. When a secular person tells me don't doubt your religion, I'm just like, yeah, I believe in it because I have faith in it. The comparative is now your religious priest is telling you this, which is significantly more harmful in my opinion and causes you to have a much larger crisis of faith, often makes you believe less, and often means that you can't have a source to rely on in tough times. I want to explain then why people don't believe religious figures in side proposition and why this actually causes causes backlash. Opening opposition, to be sure, tries explaining this when they say people have cognitive dissonance. I have 4 levels of additional analysis on why this is likely to be done much more worse than they say. First is that priests themselves often don't believe in this. When you've been told your religion is the form of salvation and you've been told consistently that this is the thing to believe for the past 50 years of your life, I'm not sure how you preach this narrative really well. I think in most cases, this is significantly worse. Second, many priests often tend to opt out. I would posit that while upper level authorities can do this well, in many cases, lower down authorities are likelier to do this significantly worse. This is often true at the point where you necessarily have incentives to cater to more people who are hardline within local communities on the comparative. So many priests tend to opt out, which causes significant degrees of fragmentation on side proposition. Thirdly, though, you often opt into more radical forms of religion on proposition. I think this is fundamentally true at the point where you are likely to get more people on our side of the house, where you're likely to have more radicals appeal to people when they're able to say this is the right path and therefore take advantage of the movement of the weakness of faith. The weighing of our extension is simple. You see small impact. But in many cases, the most important thing when you're going through tough times, to believe in a religion, to believe that as a minority, you're going to get salvation, to believe as a minority, you're going to go over your tough times. Very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the G-Dub.
Just give me like 1 quick second to like arrange my papers and all that.
Yep, all good.
Okay. Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Notice CEO does not really respond to Lucky's case. They essentially give us some more negative reasons why people will not believe when priests push this. And there are essentially 2 reasons. One is priests won't believe this. Notice that priests are scholars of religion. They know everything about every religion, and oftentimes what you learn when you go into depths of religion, that there are many similar core philosophical ideas. There are many similar core goals, and there are many similar practices, which is something that Lucky already explains. Priests are the one to know this the best. Those are the most likely to have met and talked about religion with other people because it's such a core part of their identity. That is essentially the only like real reason. Second is like they opt out. Notice that they feel, number one, that it's their duty to save these people lead them to salvation. They often have big ties with their communities. They often love these people whom they preach to, and they have sacrificed their entire life to learn this. It's very unlikely that they opt out. Then they just say radical religion. There is literally zero analysis why people will buy into this. It is too big of a point to be analyzed in VIP, therefore you should ignore it here. What do we do then to beat the opening government? Number one, opening government does very little work to explain the key clash in this debate is why would anybody trust this? This is a pretty large change in the narrative of what religious leaders preach, and why would people actually buy this? They give you number one, reason is church changes. They just say that blankly, oh, so you have heard the gays are okay, now you are going to buy into this. But what Lucky here does is characterizes what the church change means to you. It means that you could now do practices that you weren't able to do before, and you like it as a person who likes to have a lot of freedom. You like to have condom-less sex. You like to be able to eat different food. You like to be able to talk to a gay person who you maybe like, who is maybe your friend, without feeling guilt. That is why you like when the church changes. That is why you are going to support these changes. Also gives you more agency. Secondarily, they say Pope says, but look, they don't explain what the Pope says, which is crucial in persuasiveness of this argument. Lucky explains to you why Pope is actually, and characterizes how it will look, how this argument will be made in a way that will be persuasive to priests and therefore to common people alike. Thirdly, Lucky actually gives you many reasons why you have selfish reasons to believe this, regardless of do you like your priest, do you spend a lot of time in church, do you listen to every word he says religiously, right? He explains why you have existing incentives to accept people around you who are different, who are of different religion, and why you want to feel and think that they accept you, because then you have less trouble expressing your own religion. Secondarily, we give more reasons how we'll unlock their impacts. When it comes to political capital, they just say, okay, now this guy preaches different, politician can do different things. But what Lucky crucially explains to you, that number one, this political capital already exists, meaning the politicians in the status quo want to provide more rights to religious minorities. Why? Because it brings them more money from those constituencies, it brings them more peaceful living in those constituencies, it brings them votes for these constituencies. But what the delta here is, other bigger majority religion will fight against this, so it clashes out these benefits. But now when they fight against this less, because of reasons Lucky provides, now we can actually provide in Bosnian enclaves more churches for Serbs, more rights for Serbs, rights to practice their own religion, not in like Israel and Palestine. That is a really big burden to prove, and I don't think opening government reaches them. But in these places where their conflict was a long time ago, where the religions are close enough, when there is no current big ethnic tensions, we believe it is here where these impacts are unlocked, and we unlock them. But second, he explains how you can now merge your different religions to push for collective religious capital, meaning better things for every single religion, which should be weighed really highly in this debate, because this is certainly in the interest of all religious people. Now they can unite and ask for same things, that they're politicians, and politicians, if they satisfy a certain religious bloc, will satisfy it all. Thirdly, he gives you like these small impacts, but which are really important. It is the ability to act different. It is the ability to have a friend who is a Muslim and talk deeply about him, with him about most important core issues of your religion, of do you believe you are going to heaven, do you believe you are a good person, and be able to listen to his philosophical advice and be able to open up to him without judgment, because it is no longer required by all religion. This is not even mentioned by opening government. This is most likely impact on this debate, which scale is biggest and affects the most people. I'll be taking opening position before I continue.
People buy into scriptures and fundamental teachings more than leaders. This comes out in O and leads to self-conflict and alienation. This is the precondition for CO and beats bench.
And I understand your idea, like every single of these debates, all the questions are the same. No, they don't, because they don't have time or motivation to read difficult old scriptures, and usually they have a very surface level knowledge about their religion, because realize you have your job, you have your family, you have different duties, different interests. You as a religious person are not, as opening opposition wants to characterize, this is the only thing that ever exists in your life. You have very different aspects of your identity, of your life, which means that you often get religion to you served by proxy. This is another key analysis missing in the opening government that is now added here from us. This is why they don't sit at home, read the Bible and read the Quran parallel. They're like, wait, Quran is not the same as the Bible. I have to hate this religious proposal. No, they just hear there are some similarities. They're like, okay, this is a pretty reasonable thing for me to believe, especially since, like I explained, it was already pushed by the media. You have many reasons to believe. Notice now what the opening opposition says. I have just answered to their very important point. Most people don't care about religious philosophy. Therefore, when this religious philosophy changes, if that change is presented to them in the right way, which we explain why it is, they are not going to drop out of their religions. But here are more reasons why they will stay. Opening government says there is family and there is like habit. But notice, what does this mean? This means that you have gone through incredibly important experience through these religions. Through the hardest times you have sat and you have prayed to that God to salvage you. You have, when somebody close to you died, you have went to a funeral, you have cried your heart out listening to those songs, knowing that that means that soul will be salvaged. This is not something that you just doubt because one thing has once been said differently. But you do not have such extreme experiences with other religions to hate them so much, meaning those cognitions are much easier to then change. Then, closing opposition wants to claim you have more spiritual fulfillment. Listen, number one, I'm not sure how you measure this, but if you are able to do more different things and yet feel as a religious person, you can talk with different people, you can behave in different ways, that means that it's easier for you to remain in that religion and to feel spiritually fulfilled, like you're not breaking a core tenet of your religion. Secondarily, if you as different religions and if smaller religions in the majority countries can get more institutions, more places to pray, more rights, you are going to be able to get more spiritual fulfillment through all of these things, which uniquely we prove. That is why you must vote closely in government in this debate. Thank you.
I'd like to I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the ODub.
All right, the ODub is here. POIs in the chat, please. Great, let me set up my timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Let me be very clear. The ability to influence the religious landscape, the interests of religious communities, all of these concerns are downstreams of the ways in which you conceptualize faith. I think we can take the Gov bench on their best ground. That is to say, these narratives may be able to influence the ways in which you conceptualize religion, unlike what OO asserts, which when they say that your religion is fixed and unchanging. What we say on CO is that religion is often scalar. That is to say, the degree in which you opt into religion is in flux and can be chipped away by external narratives. But why do we tell you that this is a really, really bad thing? First of all, we think that the worst thing that for a religious person to experience is a large level I think the worst thing for a religious person to experience is a crisis of faith. That is to say, on an individualized level, when you are unsure what you are willing to believe, all of the downstream impacts, like the degree to which you're willing to advocate for your faith, the ways in which you conceptualize the world around you, the ways in which you're willing to listen to your community leaders when they tell you to coalesce and advocate for the things that you believe for, all become significantly hindered. Why then does this mean that even on their best case, this is bad? I think the one thing that is not symmetric in this round is the belief that is the fact that religion is a belief system. Insofar as there's often exogenous factors that determine whether or not religious conflicts exist, I think the most important in this round is your ability to rationalize these conflicts through your lens of faith. And I think there's a few implications that Muzi gives you. The first thing is that for the most vulnerable actors in this debate, that is, those religious minorities who are unable to garner the political capital to be able to sufficiently overcome the oppression that they face on an everyday basis, the very least you can do is provide the internal justification for these people for why they ought continue pursuing despite the struggles that they're facing, why they ought continue fighting, and why, even despite all the oppression that they feel from external forces, it is still worth it to achieve some level of salvation. The second thing that you would say, though, is that it is far easier to foster divisions between ethnic minorities or use existing hostile sentiments in religious communities if they don't have a strong foundation of faith. That is, when you have those post-colonial reasons, or when you have all of those exogenous factors where it is in their best incentive to try and upheave minority communities, I think you make it far easier when these minorities no longer have the same level of opt-in as they did before. And I think there is a clear brink here, right? Because I think the internal fracturing that is likely to happen within these communities when people have some degree of opt-out is the most concrete impact in this debate, insofar as any level of opt-out reduces the common power that these communities have. But let's weigh this against OG, right? I think OO tells you that there are exogenous reasons for why tolerance can never happen. But I think we can give a better mechanization that is more concrete, because it is not just that there are external factors that cause these things, but the reason why most religious conflicts exist because there is always a trade-off of resources between these two groups, and conflict is necessary for the propagation of their faith. The first thing this looks like is, for instance, the Sunni and Shia sect needing to convert people of the other sect in order to garner any level of power. That is to say, it is impossible for tolerance, it is impossible for the coexistence of both of these beliefs insofar as they are literally positioned to be antithetical to each other. And it is unclear why they would be willing to give up this positioning insofar as all teams agree that the most important thing is to propagate your religion. The second thing we would say, though, is just that many of these beliefs are contradictory. That is, when Judaism tells me that heaven does not exist, but for Catholicism, this is the most important thing, it is unclear why this trade-off in belief systems and the trade-off in the fundamental premises of your religion can allow for any kind of tolerance across the board. What is the weighing here then? I think insofar as this is true, we ought to be weighing on your ability to cope with these changes, your ability to be able to understand the oppression that occurs when this conflict exists, rather than the resolution of these conflicts itself. I don't think it's enough to just say that this is symmetric and then win. The second thing we would say, though, is if it is the case that you're unable to differentiate yourself on philosophical grounds, I think this is incredibly harmful, because insofar as the desire to differentiate exists symmetrically on both sides of the house, I think differentiating based on this external factors, such as ethnicity, such as your political systems, such as your race, are incredibly more harmful, because at least on a philosophical basis, it is far more difficult to be able to oppress other people. It is far more difficult to toe these lines when it comes to political issues than it does when you try to differentiate on other grounds. And finally, on the size of the community, I think we can just concede that it is true, and we would say that smaller communities are largely worse, because fracturing communities are worse for the most vulnerable actors, the ones who need to be able to coalesce to advocate for the things they care about, insofar as safety is ensured by numbers. And just like in any social relationship, the only way in which you can force concessions is by working across the board and forcing the other side's hand. But I'll take a point from OG. CG?
Yes, insofar as all religions are seen as valid ways of salvation, it is in the interest of religious people to be able to adopt different practices and different religions that they see best fit the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I think what you ignore here is that religions are a belief system. They're not individualized beliefs. That is, when I opt into Catholicism or Islam, I need to opt into all of the beliefs because these work synergistically to each other. It is very difficult for an individual to pick and choose within religions, insofar as one belief from a religious system is very often not integratable in another religious system. The second thing I want to say to CG, though, is that the priests, the people at the top of these religions, they tell you that they're scholars, but we tell you these people have a true belief in the system. That's why they opt into it into the first place. It's unclear to me how you can meet the burden of proof that causes the people to actually believe that you can have more progressive, or you can take beliefs from other systems in order to have a margin of change. Finally, on why we beat our own opening team. The first piece of weighing is their establishment of religion is only important, or it is important only because they say you want to go to heaven. This does not explain why your religion needs to have the capital T truth, right? They say that people may have a crisis of faith. I genuinely don't know why this happens on OO, given OG explains people can believe this. The comparative we explain is how doubt arises. You see other religions as being more valid, and this inherently causes you to question, and that you need your religion to be the only correct religion to believe, because otherwise you would feel isolated. Note that you believe your priest, but also your upbringing, which causes the doubt, as OO explains. The second point of weighing, though, is that OO's primary case is about buy-in. Their impacts lead to people opt out, but they don't explain the purpose of how religion helps you. We explain how this interacts with the average person. When you don't think God is there for you, or when you feel you don't have the scripture to rely on during bad times, that's when you feel like shit. And their impact is maybe you feel the same, but a little bit worse. Very proud.
Okay, I'd like to thank the speaker for the fine speech and thank everyone for the speeches as a whole. So